So we're going to begin in a minute. All right, so let's settle down. All right. All right, so we are in the American orbit. As in America, we're going to begin on time. All right, already we're starting in our American orientation. All right, so I want to thank everyone. So I know especially my students here who have to be here, but I thank you anyway for coming. I don't take that for granted. And of course, all the other guests, and I see faculty members and friends. And of course, thank you to Etgar Keret for being here. I want to thank also just the Lowy International School, right? This is part of the glorious events of the Tau USA Week. Today's the final day. There's still a lot of events, so right. So if you're interested in there's some stuff afterwards, you should check that out as well. And we're grateful for that. We're also grateful for the U.S. Embassy for helping to co-sponsor this, and they've always been our partner. So I want to thank them, and of course the Department of English and American Studies, where I'm a part, and most of you are a part as well. All right. So really, this is a great pleasure, and I want to briefly introduce Etgar, even though I don't think he really needs an introduction to this forum, but I will do so anyway. So here, Etgar is first and foremost a renowned writer of short fiction whose work has been translated into over 40 languages. He's received many international awards. He's a Renaissance man, I think, when it comes to the art of writing. He's produced countless short stories, graphic novels, screenplays for both film and television, theater adaptations, children's books, as well as nonfiction essays. His stories have been adapted into films, and his work has been featured in, among other places, the New York Times, the Paris Review, and of course the New Yorker, which I think is still the most prominent place for short stories, not just in the United States, but in the world. Among the many awards he has received, he won the Sapir, right, Pras Sapir, the Sapir Prize for Literature in 2018 for his short story collection, Takala B'K'tzeh Galaxia, right, I have my copy here. And also a 2019 winner of the National Jewish Book Award for Fiction. So first of all, Etgar, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
So we thought it would be, I think, a good way to kind of flow into our conversation. And by the way, this is a conversation. It's informal. We're going to be literally chatting for about an hour. I know my students have received, I hope you've read, right, a couple of his short stories, and this is the time to think about questions for him, right? And then we'll leave time, the last 30 minutes, kind of just for Q&A and just conversations, and ask him about anything you want to ask him. He said you can ask him about politics, right? You can ask him about how to become a writer, and you can ask him about anything you want, all right? So we'll leave time for that. And but maybe we should start with, you want to read maybe, and maybe say something about the story and why you chose it, and just maybe read a bit.
Yeah, well, I must say that, you know, that when I travel overseas, many times I read in English, in my bed, English stories across the ocean, but it feels even stranger doing it in Israel, you know, when everybody speaks Hebrew. So I thought I'd just kind of read the first paragraph, and maybe we'll kind of tell the story, you know, that would be easier than reading the entire story. It would take us less time, maybe. And this is the opening story from my latest story collection called Autocorrect. It will be published in the US by Rivered next May. And the story is called A Word Without Selfie Sticks. In retrospect, I shouldn't have yelled at not Debbie. Debbie herself always said that yelling doesn't solve anything. But what is a person supposed to do when a week after saying a tearful goodbye at the airport to his girlfriend, who was flying to Australia to do her doctorate, he bumps into her at an East Village Starbucks? When I saw her in the coffee shop, harassing the barista with questions about their milk substitutes, and I asked how she could have come back to New York without even letting me know, she just gave me a cold look and said impatiently, "Mister, I don't know who you are. You must have me mixed up with someone else." That's when I lost it. After almost 3 years together, I'd hoped for more civil treatment. So when she said she didn't know me, instead of arguing, I stood in the middle of Starbucks and yelled out all the intimate details I knew about her, including the scar on her back from when she fell on our trip to Yosemite and the hairy mole in her left armpit. Not Debbie didn't reply, just gave me a shocked look as two cafe employees pushed me out. So basically, it's a story about a guy who after breaking with his girlfriend, because she lives to Australia, he meets her in New York. In the beginning, she denies that she's his girlfriend, and after they speak a little bit, he understands that she comes from a parallel universe. Apparently, there is this game show in a parallel universe where they send you to an alternative universe where that is exactly identical to the place that you're coming from, except for one detail. And the game show is that the competitors are supposed to find out what's missing in this word, and which they have in their own word. For example, you could get into a word that is exactly like the word you come from, but without self-sticks. And the entire story is about them trying to find out what's missing in our word that basically not Debbie in her universe possesses, so she can win the prize. That's basically the story.
So it's also a world without selfie sticks, right? That's the title, and what a wonderful world that would be, right? If we had that. Do we want to give the spoiler for how it ends? Because it's wonderful.
Also, I can tell that basically they fall in love. The idea is that the people who lose in this game show are left in the universe that they were sent to. So basically falling in love and not finding what was missing, they kind of come to some kind of an agreement that probably she had lost and that they stay together. And as they walk in New York, he shows her the church that he saw the first time he came there and which he wanted to get married in. He fantasized on getting married in. And as they entered the church, she started to get very restless. And he asks her, what's the problem? And she said, well, it's a church, right? So where is God? And he says to her, oh, no, it's just the house of God. God isn't here. So she said, oh, what do you mean? That if you go to a synagogue or a mosque, there's no God? Like, it's a word without God? And when she says that, she immediately teleports back to the studio because she won the game show, but she kind of leaves our protagonist behind in a world in which he won't get to be with her, and also in which he'll have to raise his family and children knowing that it's a godless world.
So it's really at the end, right? So I'll leave time for questions, but I'm happy you already have a question, so hold on to that. But I want a few things here already that also just in the first opening paragraphs, but the story, right, it begins in a Starbucks in the East Village. I mean, the geography of Manhattan here is very important. It's a short story, but it begins there. Then they go to Central Park, I believe. They go to a cafe on 3rd Avenue. And then they go down to Trinity Church, which plays, right, that's where the plot really unfolds. Trinity Church is right, it's near Battery Park. It's in the south tip on Manhattan next to what was Ground Zero. And also the protagonist really, he wants to get married there, right? That's his thing about Trinity Church, which again is something which you wouldn't pick up from a Jewish American writer who Philip Roth would never think about writing something like that, I think. So can you talk maybe a bit about New York, because it's such a New Yorker story in a way?
Yeah, well, I want to say that it's basically probably the second story in which I kind of mess with God. I have a previous story which I really like, which is called Pick a Color, and it's a story about a hate crime. And again, I'll spoil this story too, but it's about a black man who's a victim of a hate crime that leaves him in a wheelchair. And this man gets married in a church, and when he gets married, the priest tells him that God loves him. And after this, also his wife gets murdered, and he confronts the priest and he says, how can God loves us if I'm in a wheelchair and my wife is dead? And basically the priest knows all the answers that they taught him in priest school, but when he looks at this man, he feels so angry that he starts cursing God. And he curses God in such horrible curses that God comes to the church. And when God comes to the church, he comes through the invalid platforms because God is in a wheelchair. And God says to the priest, what do you think, like that I'm a sadist or something? Like I've made you the best I can. Like I'm a failing, fucked up God, so you're failing up, fucked up people. And then basically the priest who had lost his belief returns to believing because he can believe in a flawed God. So when I wrote this story, I realized that I would say I'm agnostic. Okay, I don't know. I wouldn't say I'm an atheist, but when I wrote those stories, I find very quickly that God becomes the Christian idea of God. It's almost as if.
Why? Just intuitively?
Yeah, I think it's like a fear. It's like distancing something. Like, you know, okay, if I want to kind of mess with the God, I would rather mess with somebody else's God, you know, not my God, you know. I mean, you know, I don't know when I'll have to get recircumcised, you know, it would get even. But the Christian God is a little bit more distant. And I think that in Pick a Color, it took place in some kind of a fairy tale US, but it wasn't real US. But here, I think that there was also something about it because there is something about this kind of a game show and choices that this idea of kind of that, okay, I love you, but I have a good job in a startup, so I won't do this, but as I have, you know, they offered me tenure in the Midwest, so I'll see you in 8 months, you know, so I think that this kind of logic worked very well with this idea of a game show. It's all about choices, like, should she stay in his universe or in another universe? You know, should they look for things that are missing in supermarkets or in continents, you know? So all this idea of kind of making choices in a very kind of stressful way, as if like, you know, all the time you're kind of making sure that your future won't collapse, but don't really have a present, is a sensation that I many times associate with my visits to the US. You know, this kind of idea of hyperventilating.
Utilitarian, right?
Yeah.
Very practical minded, not romantic at all, in that sense.
No, I think it could be romantic, but it's the tension between the romantic and the pragmatic is totally legitimate in the cultures. It's kind of okay to say, I love you more than anything, and I got this really good job.
Right,
you know,
so
in
I'm
Palo
always going
Alto,
to choose the job. I'm
yeah,
gonna choose the job.
No, or kind of living together and meeting, you know, every.
Yeah, I have a lot of friends who that in academia in
Yeah,
America.
and
they meet only on the breaks.
Yeah, so it sounded more American than Israeli to me.
And why place it in New York? Does New York have any special significance?
First, I think, you know, there are a few places in the U.S. that I kind of feel that I know or connected to, but I would say that, you know, New York is probably the place that I've spent most of the time. But also I like this idea of New York kind of being this kind of a hub where, if you think, immigrants from parallel universe, you know, they come to Ellis Island. You know, it's really like this kind of idea that it's kind of the center of their universe to the terminal or the center of our universe.
So it's a multi-dimensional melting pot, literally, in New York. So expanding this idea of the immigrant city, yeah, that makes sense. So you talked about the sense of place of New York, and right. So we just gave this example, right? Because this is also a pretty recent story, right? This is from 2 years ago.
Yeah, a couple of years ago.
And but when we read here also for the class a variety of stories that you recommended, and I'll just give a taste when I'm thinking about the sense of place that you offer in your stories. And here I'm just giving a few examples, right? One is a cafeteria worker in what I assume is rural Ohio or suburban Ohio, something. There's Cleveland is mentioned, right? So we have that in Car Concentrate, right? So we have, again, and a cafeteria worker whose brother is in a maximum security prison in New Jersey, maximum security. right? He's not white collar. He's a serious criminal. So so you have that, and then we have we have a kid from San Diego, I believe, in the Arctic Lizard, right?
Yeah.
Whose sister works at McDonald's, and he kind of has to join. This was, by the way, this was very terrifying because this was Trump, right? This was Trump's
Third.
third, right? It was his third term, and it was. You already imagined this back, right? When was this? 2018, I think, or something like that.
Yes, about 6 years ago, or 5 years ago.
So this is right. This is Trump's an imaginary scenario. Trump's third administration. Even though he said now it's going to be the second. It's just not going to end, right?
Yeah.
So he's not going to need.
Yeah, I'm going to adjust the story.
Right, he's not going to need to be elected a third time. He said that. So it's that, right? And there's a 14 plus. That's the name of the unit, right? The 14 plus unit, I think, because there's no more soldiers left. It's like this world war.
Is there not enough people to fight all the wars? So basically, they start drafting young people, and what they do is I'm kind of blacking out on the name of the game that you pick up those little Pokemon. Yeah. So what they do is basically the way that they draft young kids, that they project the most rare kind of Pokemon style in war zones. So you can only catch it if you're a soldier. So they make kind of commercials in which they say, would you want to have an Arctic lizard that can beat everything? So join the army. And if you go to Iraq, you can catch them there. So it's kind of this idea, because I think that there is something about Trump, and it's really like when you write the stories, you don't want to judge somebody or say this is bad, this is good. It's just kind of this kind of feeling that you had, and I think that even back then there was this kind of a WWF, WWE kind of feeling about it. This idea that are we kind of, is it a show or is it an action? Are we having a claim about reality, or are we just doing stuff? Because when you see kind of these wrestling competitions, they're fake. The people that see them know that they're fake. They want to see who's going to win, but it's scripted, and they know that it's a script, but they still want to win, and they're still happy when they win, and they're still sad when somebody loses, even though it's fake. And I think that a lot of our kind of dialogue with politics had become, I think that Trump is the epiphany of it. Yeah. It became this kind of dialogue with something that we know that it's kind of a show, it's a symbol, it's not necessarily consistent. You can say this thing, you can say, and the question is really, let's say, if you think about it, today politics, if in the past politics would be something that would arrange our life and would make us survival more possible, then today politics is, I would say, the number one or the most major form of entertainment. I mean, like, I'm sure that all of you are great readers, but if you compare, for example, the time that you spent, I don't know, reading books, watching movies, doing cultural activities, how much of this time had transformed into observing the reality and reacting to this reality. Basically, like, I mean, I would say that the average person today spends something like 3 hours, maybe, watching TV, looking at CNN, reading in Facebook something, and then reading that this thing isn't true. So basically, what we're doing is kind of, we're saying, we're trying to understand the world better. We want to know where they put wolf traps and which river is poisoned. But actually, this had become a form of entertainment. Yeah. And I think that the fact that when you see in the US, that let's say, when you see Trump and Elon Musk, the first thing I think about those people, what they have in common, is that they have many followers on X.
Yeah.
It's really, so.
Well, they have X. Elon Musk owns X.
Yeah, no, but I'm saying, I think Trump was the person with the biggest number of followers at the point of time, and Musk, pragmatically, he's the person with the biggest number of followers because he owns X, and also a lot of people following. So I'm saying that, think about it, like, we can skip democracy. We can just go on X and see the people that has the biggest number of followers will run the world. And I'm saying that in a sense, this is actually what's happening. This idea of, let's say, when you see government where it's a little bit like, I don't know, like in a superhero movies or whatever, like that basically every minister has a story. It doesn't have a proficiency or knowledge about what he does. So I'm saying, let's say if I do a WWE or WWF thing, then one could be the Undertaker and he can find somebody who is the astronaut. And I can play the astronaut and I can say that I came from outer space and I can beat the crap out of this other guy in a fake fight, you know? And everybody would see it and like it, but this doesn't have to do with reality. So I'm saying if I can be an astronaut who fights somebody, why not bring somebody who has a podcast and likes tattoos and was a soldier in Iraq many years ago and say he can be the Minister of Defense because in DC comics or in the Marvel comics, this makes perfect sense. And maybe it won't be good for the army, but it would be very entertaining. And we're already in a world where we don't know if we want things to be solved or to be entertained. You know, my son is a teenager, and he said to me, I said to him that everything is happening and too many things, and I don't know, and a lot of stuff. So he said, Dad, if one is doomed to live in a Netflix series, then it might as well be in the end of the season episode, you know?
But it's only if the season continues.
Or maybe last in the last
the end of
episode.
the season.
But for my son, like kind of this idea that a lot of stuff is happening is actually, it's kind of so much less boring than those times when there wasn't really something interesting in the news and you had to go and see a movie or stuff. But you know, but my son knows that he's going to turn on the phone and he doesn't know what's going to happen. But maybe they'll shoot at Trump and he'll fist pump. Yeah. Or maybe some continent will, I don't know, will be covered in water. Or maybe they'll shoot Greta out of a cannon to shut a hole in the ozone layer. But what we know, the promise that we have, it's like I'm saying if I have to make a prediction about tonight, when you're going to watch the news, something that going to shake your world is going to happen. You're going to be so disappointed / pissed / happy / confused, you know? You're going to get your money worth. I don't know what's going to happen. But I can promise you that the next day this is going to happen too. And basically, this is kind of like a kind of a Beavis and Butthead universe in which we kind of glare at the word and you know, and the Grandmaster says, don't worry, more action to come. Yeah, we bring you those guys from North Korea. Yeah, Chechenian guys. Another war, maybe something in Asia. Don't worry, and a meteor is going to hit us. No, the COVID is back. No, COVID is not back. The vaccines are good. No, Kennedy says they're bad. You know, so it's really like, it's a little bit like kind of the word that became this kind of, let's say, a Jerry Springer show, where they say, wait with us after the commercial, somebody's going to beat up somebody and you're going to see something disgusting you never saw before.
I mean, so obviously politics as entertainment, right? That was a long process, but everything you mentioned here, I have to say, just historically, the Jerry Springer show, right? For those who are not familiar, right? So that's a show in the late 80s, 90s. Jerry Springer was he actually passed away recently when he was a Jewish American journalist, and he had a very notorious talk show where he'd invite people so they'd start fighting, right? So it's like, so he'd invite neo-Nazis and Jews, right? So that's the type of stuff, right, that he'd do. He invented this kind of...
He was the Immanuel Kant of crap TV.
Oh, I don't know who that's more insulting
He's
to.
like the spiritual father of cheaters, you know?
Yeah.
I'm sure you're educated people, so you must have seen cheaters.
I actually read Jerry Springer's autobiography once because I was at an airport and I needed to buy something for the flight.
No,
and that was
actually,
the only
he looks
thing.
like an interesting person.
He was interesting. It's very smart, and he knew all these things. But I say this because Springer and Trump, right? Trump knew Springer. Trump admired Springer. The whole kind of talk show mentality that emerges in the 80s with Trump, right? And you mentioned WWE, of course. I think we know the students who I have a course about the 80s, and I show Trump wrestling, right? Trump wrestles.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember this. You can see it on YouTube. He wrestles what's called the Battle of the Billionaires with Vince McMahon. And yesterday, by the way, again, everything, yesterday, Trump announces that Linda McMahon is his Secretary of Education, right? She is the CEO of WWE, of World Wrestling Entertainment. So this idea of politics and entertainment, this is the world we're living in. It's not a story anymore from Etgar's imagination.
No, but also, again, you know, I think more than that, like, if you would see a meeting point, let's say between politics and sports, then, I don't know, in Sparta, it was like, you know, you had to be strong and stuff. But here, basically, what it says using the WWE as a model is basically, I'm going to make a press conference and tell you something that is not true and do stuff that I can't really do with people who can't do it either, and it's going to be great fun. And I think that no, in many senses, you know, it's an honest disclosure that, let's say, that Biden never gave. You know, when Biden came, he says, I speak about reality, and I want to change reality. But Trump, you know, just from the beginning, he says, you know, this is going to be so much fun. It's going to be exciting. Weird things are going to happen. Some of them are not true, but they're going to blow your mind, you know? And again, you know, it's really like, I feel that with evolution, we've distanced ourselves from kind of basic survival more and more. You know, those days when me and Yoav would run in the jungle, and I say, oh my God, I'm happy that Yoav here is so slow, the lion's going to eat him. You know, they're way behind us. You know, it's all about, it's kind of like we're distancing us. I was just thinking about this, that I think 3 years ago, the word of the year in the Merriam-Webster thing.
They still do that? The word of the year in the
They still do that? They're going to stop, you know, because of what I'm going to say now, I bet, you know, they saw it too. So the word of the year was gaslighting. You remember when the word of the year was gaslighting? Does anybody gaslight anybody around here lately? No, people don't use it. You know, this became obsolete.
So fast.
Yeah, and you know why? Because the idea of gaslighting is that, let's say, if you could imagine reality as a continent, okay? And you know, continents sometimes split. So there is a moment before the continent splits, a moment of confusion. And then Yoav plays with my mind. And Yoav says, reality is not what you think it is. It's something else. Wow, 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 wow. And I believe Yoav because I'm such a naive fool. But what happened is that 3 years later, tectonically, the continent had already broke. So Yoav can't say this is reality because we don't share a reality. Because Yoav is this kind of a dumbass that he really thinks that vaccinations would help him. He really thinks that liberalism is important. He really thinks that all men were created equal. You know, this guy, he lives on another planet. He can't gaslight me. I don't get there, you know? So this idea of a word that kind of keeps shifting and spreading in almost kind of caving into itself, it's as my son says, it's going to end badly, but it's fascinating to watch.
Could you? I just want to one more question about Trump, and then we'll move on. That is Trump is a. Could you have imagined him as a literary character, or does he even defy imagination?
No, I actually think it's very easy to imagine him because I think that he's a product of a culture. Is the epiphany of the product of culture, because there is something about like when you go to a museum and you see something that is ready-made. So Trump, like I think humanly is kind of a Duchamp's toilet. No, really, because there's nothing that Trump does that he invented. Even though I think that the way that he speaks is amazing, and I truly think that I never saw anyone that evokes so many positive emotions in me when he dances. When I see him dance, I say, maybe humanity does have a chance, you know. It's small and it's kind of like ever shifting and there's something positive, and whenever he dances, he kind of seems nice and less sleazy than the rest of the time. And I'm saying, I don't know, it's like he has a lot of power, but I feel that he didn't invent anything.
He didn't invent a political style?
No, what I think is that he took things from entertainment and brought them into politics. That's the shift, because Because the idea is that politics, I think, in a sense, was always a little bit boring, because it never had to do with what we watch on TV. It only had to do with what kind of water we drink. And Trump made this move of kind of saying, I know how this works, how Jerry Springer works. Let's bring the Jerry Springer to politics, and then politics will be less boring.
Politics is boring, and now, but that's a good thing, right? I miss boring. We'll see in the next 4 years.
No, but let's say when you see Musk, then I think that in a sense, like if you think about the logic of it, it's the comeback of kings. Because the idea is that when you have somebody who's both the richest person and who's responsible of taxation, I saw Robin Hood, I know what it means if you have all the money and you already also make the rules. It's not I think a king is something entertainment-wise that is something that is very, very attractive. I read much better and more fascinating books about kings than, let's say, about ministers of health.
Well, democratic deliberation is boring, right? Bureaucracy is boring. At the end of the day, you mentioned clean water, but that's how you get clean water. But then the question is, can entertainment and this new era of whether it's oligarchies, aristocracies, whatever Elon Musk is, if at the end of the day it can produce the results that make people's lives better, I don't think it can. I hope it can, but I doubt it.
No, but what I think, first of all, it's kind of always kind of a big question, what does it mean making life better,
Yeah.
But what I think is that survival had became much, much easier. And that could mean that you could lower the bar. Because, I mean, if, first of all, I don't know, if humanity had to be cutting edge and to deal with all kinds of issues, so now you can, just kind of sit back and do dumb things and see how I don't know, things rot. You still survive, it will work, and your health will get better and you live longer years.
We'll see with the vaccinations that Kennedy wants to start prohibiting, right? So, what you said that Trump is emblematic of, right? That he's a product of American culture. What are some of those maybe values or characteristics that you think Trump is so expressive of that are kind of emblematic of American culture?
Well, I think that this kind of there is something about first of all, the capitalist idea, this idea of putting yourself in the center in a very kind of Protestant way. I think a lot of the arguments around Trump is how rich he is. Now, you would say, like, if I would be Trump, I would say, oh, I'm so poor. Give me $1. Come on, be nice. Like, what do I care? But these arguments, people that want to attack Trump, they say, he's not really rich. He didn't make any money. He says, yes, I did. I made a lot of money. This is something that, for me, very much is connected with Protestant and Calvinistic values, this idea that if you're rich, God loves you. So there is something about Trump that all the time kind of, he says, I don't want a kind of a goody two-shoes morality to decide if I'm good or bad. I want my success and my position in life. If I can date somebody that is much younger than me, if I have a private plane, if Elon Musk plays rugby with me, I don't know, then it means that I'm a good person, that God loves me, that I'm going somewhere. And this is something that I think that was always somewhere in the capitalistic system, this idea that, that look, he's so rich, he's so successful, he must be good.
Right, so chosen, remember we talked so much about that, the Protestant work ethic, right? The Puritan spirit of predestination, how central that is for Calvinists. I never thought to connect Trump to that, but certainly maybe you could see the support, right, or the appeal of Trump.
It's really, and what I feel more than anything is that there is something about, for me, let's say American culture or American thing, it's always dynamic, it's the kind of country of the frontier. It's always kind of pushing it and going anywhere. And I think that in a sense, Trump even if he's not the first, and we Israelis can be proud that we had Netanyahu before Trump, I think that he really pushed something in the conjunction between technology and politics. And this is the idea that you understand that if you communicate with your audience through a certain technology, then your commitment is more to the technology than to reality. It's like Marshall McLuhan saying, the medium is the message. So I know how to say it in Hebrew. so the idea is that think about, I feel that when I see Donald Trump speak, and by the way, when I see Israeli politicians also speak, like I remember I saw the Israeli government member Almog Cohen in a talk when the moderator quoted Ehud Barak, who was the prime minister of Israel, then Almog Cohen says, "You got your facts wrong. Ehud Barak was never the prime minister of Israel."
God, really? I didn't see that.
Yeah, no. So I'm saying I want to tell you something. You have Walt, the delivery. So the delivery guy that brought me food a couple of days ago, I said, "Thank you." He went a few steps down and then he walked up and he says, "I know you. You wrote the national anthem." And I said, "No, I write books." So he said, "Same," and he left. So I'm saying this idea where somebody that could think that I wrote the national anthem 120 years ago and still have some energy, to order pasta after that is really I think this is something from the science of time. This idea that you don't need to have any body of knowledge and you don't need to be consistent. And this is something that, think about it. Let's say when life is very much like your Instagram feed, okay? You open it, you don't do nothing, you see a movie, Here it is, you see this little cat playing with a duckling. It's so cute, I love it. Two men drowning in China. Oh my God, this is horrible. Rapper says, fuck the police. Yeah, we should fuck the police more. Okay, now, when you see all this, I'm saying there's nothing that travels between the movies. And by the way, I'm not present in any of them. I'm not a duckling. I never fucked the police. I wanted to, but never had a chance. So I'm saying I'm not represented, but the idea is that I can be, cats are so cute. Oh my God, those people are horrible. But ducks are cute, and people are horrible. The ability to switch between them had created this kind of politics in which people like Trump or people like Netanyahu, they don't have to be consistent because you have the scope of the Instagram movie. And if, let's say, somebody like Bibi says, I led the opposition to the disengagement, and you have movies of him voting for the disengagement.
Several times.
Several times, but you see it on films, and you say, how can those people get the fact? And say, we are not, when I go to Instagram, I don't go for reality, I go for the experience. So I would like to feel that my prime minister was against the disengagement. That's what I want, and he gives it to me. The same way that Trump can throw a giant over a wall and, in a WWE move. So I'm saying it's really, really like they give us this kind of politics that reminds me when you're a kid and your parents drive somewhere and you see a rundown cat and you say, the cat, and your mom said, he's just sleeping, So there is something very soothing about the Trump and Netanyahu lack of consistency, that they like us so much that they'll hide the truth from us if it would make us happy.
So we could come back to the Netanyahu-Trump connection in the Q&A. I want to ask about the sense of place that you could place yourself and identify with quite naturally, I have to say. The cafeteria worker from rural Ohio, and the soldier from San Diego, and the hitman, right? And this was right. You mentioned this when we corresponded from one of your earlier stories, right?
Best
Kavanot Tovot,
intention,
right?
Yeah.
Best intentions, about a hitman from an orphanage in Atlanta, and these are just a few examples that come to mind, but I think there's many others. How are you able to, unless you were a hitman from Atlanta, how are you able or why are you able really to put yourself so naturally, I must say, in all of these very different American average Joe type situations?
So I must say is that when I began writing stories that took place in the US, it all came from the fact that I loved the American films, I loved American literature, I loved comic books, you know. So I kind of grew up on that, and when I would write those stories, they would be exaggerated on purpose. So in the first two story collections that I had in Israel, I had a section that was not translated to other language, which was called Sifrut Meturgemet, translated literature. And in these stories, I would write stories that I pretend as if they were written originally in English, but badly translated to Hebrew. So they had all those kind of cliches that doesn't translate well and stuff like that. And they would all take place, let's say, in rural Iowa, or you know, in a boxer in the 30s preparing for a battle. So they kind of dealt with all what I would think was America, very much like Karl May, the German writer, who would write westerns without ever being there. But what happened very quickly is that I began publishing, and when I started publishing, then the US was one of the places where I did better, you know, and I contributed to a radio show which I really love and was my big break called This American Life in NPR, and I found myself kind of traveling a lot to the US and going to the US, and a lot of those invitations came from rural parts. For example, I spent 4 months in Iowa City. I was in the Sundance program in Utah, so I've been a couple of times, spent a long time in Utah among Mormons, you know. And Ari Fulman, who made Wars with Bashir, he always has these jokes that he says that I'm the only person who went beyond where Eran Kulirin had went, because Eran Kulirin made the band visit and had this kind of reputation of doing a lot of events in the US. So I've been to places really like, I don't know, like I mean, Tuscaloosa, Alabama, Akron, Ohio. The logic many times of speaking engagement is that the further and more remote you're willing to go, the better the pay is. Like to speak in NYU is not very profitable, but if you speak in a place that it takes 4 hours to get there and they don't have an airport and they feed the dean's body to the wolves, then you're going to get paid really well.
But how do you explain that, right? Because if in, I mean, certainly Iowa, what is your ability? What do you think is the ability to connect? Because at the end of the day, are you, and again, this brings us to a more fundamental question, right? Are you an Israeli writer? Is there even such a thing? Are you an American writer? Because how do you connect then with someone in rural Iowa or Utah? All of these are very Trump states, by the way, right?
Yeah,
conservative areas.
Yeah. No, I think that I don't see, let's say, in a way, I think I've exploited the US, you know, for my purposes. And for me, the idea was that I think that there was something kind of growing up in Israel, in a place that was so ideological and so kind of full of conflicts and narratives that I basically kind of, it's like a swimming pool, and I wanted to have some kind of a dry patch. I wanted to be out enough so I can reflect on what's in. And I think that you know, that there is this thing in the US, basically both being a superpower, representing for me a lot of things culturally, you know, things that I like, things that I like less, but the fact that it's kind of different. And I think that the moment that you have kind of, let's say, you can think of 2 different ways of living, then you can create a plane. You know, I mean, if you just live in a certain way, if you don't know that there is a way to do things otherwise, then you're stuck. And with me, I think I went to the Americana basically to kind of liberate myself from some kind of a pioneer ethos. And then I say, if I can...
From an Israeli pioneer ethos.
So I felt as long as I can shift and alternate between those kind of two realities, then I won't be enslaved by
any
either
of
of
them.
them.
Right.
Yeah.
So there is that constant tension, I suppose, right?
What?
A tension, right?
Yeah.
Just in that sense of
Yeah.
a struggle.
And for me, it was always a challenge because, again, there are many things that I like in American culture and values, and there are things that I like less. Then it's always kind of a little bit for me. I like to slide into a very American scene, but to kind of discover a different kind of the U.S. in it. For example, in Flower Ready, in my book, I have a story called Crumb Cake, and it's a story about a guy, a 50-year-old guy that lives with his mother, who's basically a little bit kind of controlling him, and he doesn't earn any living or anything. And this guy has a winning lottery ticket, which he doesn't collect because he understands that if he collects it, then him and his mother will be separated, and that his mother, the fact that his mother has power on him is what keeps on going. The fact that she controls him economically and everything. So basically, he wins the lottery and decides not to collect the ticket. So this is like a very kind of un-American story in an ethos. This idea of somebody who bought the lottery, was supposed to get what the God thought he deserved, also kind of realizing some kind of a capitalist idea, and choosing this idea of his relationship with his mother, his compassion to his mother, over some kind of a connecting to the world. He basically makes himself some kind of an outsider. So I think in many of those stories, I kind of like to kind of create a different narrative about what does it mean to be American.
Many different narratives, right? Because
Yeah.
it seems like, and so just in terms of, I wanted to come back because one of the reactions, I won't say who, but even a few people in this hall, when I said, oh, Etgar Keret is coming, and they're like, well, but he's such an Israeli writer. And that was an intuitive thing that a lot of people said, right? Because first of all, he writes a lot about Israel, and right, the presence of the Holocaust and things like that are so palpable in his fiction. And yet, there is something, and from the very beginning, right, from your earliest works, and I think just reading in the last few weeks, all the works, I was looking at an evolution, I think, right? So even from the beginning, right, Gagwai Kissinger, right, Missing Kissinger is, I think, right, your second work,
Yeah.
right, from the early or mid-1990s. And I went to the story, the eponymous story that the book is named after, Missing Kissinger, and I looked for Kissinger, and I read it, I reread it. Where's Kissinger? No Kissinger, right? It's about it's basically what you'd say. It's about, right? It's about a young man whose girlfriend, right, says he doesn't love her enough.
No,
She wants proof.
His girlfriend and mother
That.
hates each other,
Right.
and each of them asks him as a proof of his ultimate love to them to kill the other one. So in the end, he killed
Both.
Both.
Right. So of course, Missing Kissinger is the natural title for that. And when I read that, I said that's so I read that, and that's how. When I thought about how should we call this, I thought that's the American orbit, right? Because
Yeah.
the orbital language is, there's a gravitational pull, I think, maybe I'm totally wrong in how I'm interpreting this, Kissinger has nothing to do with the story, but there's something about
so for
the
me,
presence.
I was born in '67, and through my kind of kindergarten days, there would always be this situation where they would say that we're about to go to war, and then Kissinger would fly to the Middle East and he would be able to kind of negotiate, kind of put the flames down, or kind of negotiate some kind of a ceasefire.
Yeah.
And in the story, for me, the hero sees his girlfriend and his mother, and he wishes that there would be some way to
Some
kind
Kissinger.
of negotiate between them or kind of diffuse it. But it's a very personal association.
No, but it's there. It's implicit, but it's there. That's what I
So
suspected.
I must say that when my book came out in the UK, then the interpretations they gave to it was that basically it's missing kissing her. That I can't, yeah, I don't know, they're Brits, they know stuff, they make excellent tea.
Right, well, they look at language, and they take a special, right, the English language, I think they pay more attention to it maybe than Americans. Right, so I want to build upon this point, right? I'll take maybe one or two questions, then we'll open it up for the audience. So I want to talk about the choice of, which I think today seems quite standard, but the choice of being primarily a short story writer, right? That is something, even today, I don't think it's that common, but certainly if you're thinking about the late 80s, the early 90s is when you really, right, when you emerge kind of as a writer here, at least in Israel and then internationally. And the choice of being a short story writer, for me at least, I think is a very American decision, right? Especially if you look at, at Israeli fiction at the time, and even today, right? Mostly these epic novels, Amos Oz, David Grossman, and the short story, with the exception, of course, the Russians and Maupassant, but it is an American. It's a very quintessential American. It's short, it's to the point, it's pithy, I don't have time. I'm reading it in a magazine on my way to work, right? And the emergence of the short story, 19th century America, that's what it is. It goes hand in hand with mass publications, with these newspapers. A lot of the short stories that also we read in this class by Hawthorne, by Poe are serialized in these magazines. There's something very tachlis, right? Very pithy about that. And I'm wondering if you maybe can tell a bit about that decision. What drew you to be a short story? Right.
So I can say that, first of all, I think that people talk a lot about short story, short fiction, but basically I think that, let's say, the kind of fiction that I write, I don't know, flash fiction, or for most of its work, I would say that it's not like short stories, because short stories sometimes, let's say Alice Munro short stories or stuff, they kind of have the logic of a novel, only kind of shrunk. And the idea is that when I began writing, it wasn't that I had any model, but the feeling that I had was, let's say, that if I want to lift reality, it breaks. I'm left with one piece. It's kind of from wherever I try to lift, it kind of shatters. And I think that when I began writing, the idea of Israel as a very kind of a monolithic state, was this idea that everything stands together. We are one people. We have one vision. The people of forever are not afraid, and stuff like that. Then I felt all the time that I say, no. Like I connect to this fragment, but I cannot put them together in something that is coherent. And I think that this is kind of this idea of not creating a different model of Israelism, but more kind of deconstructing the existence of one, was also something that gave me this drive to go to the US, to kind of have some kind of a leverage from the outside to be able to deconstruct this.
And in terms of translation, because a lot of I read the original Hebrew and then I read it in English, and I have to say some things, it's not that it doesn't work, but there's something that obviously there's things which are lost in translation, right? Even, and I know these are many times this is your decision, right? It's the publishers or translators, but even, right, Takala B'Ktzei Galaxia, which is a wonderful, it's a wonderful story, but it's just a wonderful title. And in English, it's, right, what was it? It was...
Fly Already.
Yeah, so fly.
Which actually I like that. But there is something very interesting about languages. And I can say that, for example, there are stories that I publish them in different titles in Hebrew and in English. And for me, it kind of makes perfect sense, because sometimes there is something that one language allows and the other does not. For example, the story Fly Already, in Hebrew it's called Al Ta'aseh et Ze, don't do it. Now, the idea is it's a story about a father and a son that they go down the road, and the little boy sees a man about to jump from a roof of a building, and the father tries to stop this man while the little boy tries to encourage him because he thinks he's a superhero. so he wants to see him fly. So in the story, uh, the kid encourages him to fly. Now the idea of, he says to him, come on, fly already. Now in Hebrew, you say, nu ta'uf kvar. Now fly, ta'uf kvar is like fuck off. So I'm saying fly already is something that really has to do with the original meaning. It's about this guy saying to somebody, there is something that I like about the tension between fly and already. Fly is something that is omnipotent and doesn't have any tension and stuff, while already is something that is impatient. And so I like it, but it doesn't work in Hebrew. Yeah. And many times it's also the other way around. I don't know, I have a story called Perach Lev HaZahav, which is a story about a guy who's trying to get some pots to impress a waiter in a cafe. And Perach Lev HaZahav is basically the gold heart flower is kind of a fairy tale that in my generation all the kids knew. And also when you want to have a bud, in Hebrew you call it perach. So it's kind of made sense. And when it was translated to English by Nathan Englander, he says to me, it will never work in English. And the name was 1 gram short, you know.
That's good, that's good. So you just mentioned Nathan. I was wondering, and I know a lot of the students also asked me about this. Can you say something about who do you read or who you read? Or, I mean, right, Nathan Englander as a contemporary of yours. I know you're also friends.
Yeah.
But just reading, you know, I see there's different, right? There's some Raymond Carver, I don't
Cheever.
know. Cheever, right? No, Israelis don't read Cheever. I was very surprised, very waspish, kind of forgotten. Americans don't read Cheever, so certainly not Israelis. I was very surprised about that. Vonnegut, right, with the sci-fi stuff and the fantasy. Can you maybe say a bit about that?
About Vonnegut?
Well, about any Americans that you like to read.
Yeah, there are many, many writers that I like to read, but what I can say about Vonnegut is that for me, I began writing during my compulsory army service. And I think that at the time...
so what, 1980s? You want to date that?
I was drafted in 1986, yeah.
Okay.
And what basically for me, I didn't think that I didn't have any plans to write. You know, I studied math and physics. I was supposed to go for the academic reserves in the Technion, in the Tech Institute, and I had no wish to write, or I loved reading, but I didn't want to write. And basically, when I was in the army, then they would detain me many times because I would talk too much, so I would stay. And whenever I would stay in the base, I would look for something to read. And I remember that I stumbled upon Kafka and upon Vonnegut at the same time. So I read like Metamorphosis and other stories, and the Slaughterhouse-Five together. And I felt for me that it was two things. There was something about Kafka that kind of told me, you can write too, because writing could be about anxiety, it could be about failure. It doesn't have to be pragmatic and tell people, you know, you don't have to show models at work. It's just enough to say, oh my God, I can't do it anymore, you know? So this was kind of a validation that I can write. And there was something about Vonnegut that I really, really felt that it kind of offered me some kind of a model that I really needed, which was this idea of basically being critical through humor, and being critical many times by kind of taking reality and opening it to something that is not realistic. You know, it's not necessarily science fiction, but in books that he had, like, you know, he always has Kilgore Trout, this fictional character who writes short stories or novels that many times are, I think, kind of are not very far from the stuff that I actually write, you know. And this idea is that by kind of telling those strange tales, you can invent something that would be relevant for our reality. And you know, and Slaughterhouse-Five was something that really resonated in me. I'm son of Holocaust survivors, and it takes place in Second World
Right.
War, and basically it deals with this idea of a bombing
Dresden, right? It's about the Dresden.
Dresden,
Yeah.
but bombing civilians, and the question of collateral damage, and the idea of what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do when you fight people that are mixed with civilian population, and all this kind of thing that that I read in the army. It was relevant. We were in the same realm, and I saw how he was kind of dealing with it, and there was something very kind of both modest and kind of nonchalant in it. And I say, yeah, this is maybe a way to kind of to this kind of diffuse this bomb.
No, but I think diffuse is a very good verb for that, because there's great depth in Vonnegut, and yet it's right the way he expresses it is quite lighthearted in a way that doesn't challenge us too much, I think, as readers, but it does educate us and it stimulates our thought.
But I think that the key thing for me, both in Kafka and Vonnegut, which I think that many people would disagree with me, was that I saw them both as very accessible. There was something about the dialogues that they engaged. I read many writers that I loved that wanted to teach me, impress me, explain to me things that I didn't know. But when I would read Vonnegut and the Kafka, in the end, like it was this kind of feeling that you sit with a college friend, It could be a depressed one, or it could be a funnier one. But this idea that it's kind of a intimacy that doesn't have any hierarchy in it.
Yeah.
It's not like a writer that is more important than you.
You mentioned fun. I want to ask that, and then I'll open it up. That it does seem Kafka, I don't think he had fun. Right, writing for him was quite painful, if I recall correctly. But you do seem to have read. I think even I read Salman Rushdie, I think, or someone once said that that your stories they reflect the fact that you're having fun literally with us, and that writing is an experience that is uplifting for you. Is that true? I mean, is it joyous? Is it therapeutic?
Yes,
Is it?
it's like for the last 3 years, I have a newsletter on the Substack platform, and I kind of write every week. And basically, when I started doing it, then people like from the publishing world, that I know in Israel, said, no, don't do it, and why write a newsletter and stuff. And I said to them that there is something about it that for me, my writing, if I write fiction or nonfiction, it's some form of a beginning of a dialogue. It's not that I figured it out and I want to tell my writers what to do now. It's kind of like starting a conversation and saying, don't you think this is weird? I don't know. I think it's weird, and the reader has to engage in it. And one of the things that pushed me to doing a weekly newsletter was this kind of understanding that when you publish a book every 5 years, every 6 years. And there was something about reality that they say, I don't want to wait 5 years for somebody to say that my story about this app sucks, In 5 years, I don't know what we're going to talk about. And the idea is that, strange enough, when I did a newsletter, my first thought was to do an Israeli one. But then it was very obvious, very quickly obvious that the ecosystem won't be able to make it. And now today, in a strange way, I do see myself as an Israeli writer, but when I publish every week, more than 90, I would say 90% of my readers,
It's in English, right?
Yes, they're American.
Yeah.
So there are like 5% maybe Israelis, but most of them are American. So it's also funny that in the end, when I wanted to have this ability to do a dialogue, to engage in a dialogue, then in Israel I had a WhatsApp group, and in the US, immediately it's a newsletter, it's 10,000 of people, it's you earn a living out of it. It's really like the stuff that I did in Israel as a hobby in the US suddenly.
So some of these more practical considerations, right? They do, at the end of the day, determine.
Yeah, but it's not only practical. Again, I think all the time. I think when it comes to the U.S., Israel, it's all this idea that all the time I need to distance myself to get closer. So for example, for me, it's really, really interesting that, let's say, I write political pieces on my newsletter, and it's very, very interesting because those pieces, sometimes I publish them in Israel, in Yediot Achronot, or I just talk to my friend about it. And the idea is that when I send this to the American ecosystem, it really helps me see things better, instead of being kind of stuck in those. I just give you a weird thing. I wrote a piece called So You Think You Can Tell about the idea that they wanted to boycott Roger Waters in radio shows here. And it's a very, very personal piece about how when I got drafted to the army, I got drafted with my two best friends, and we decided what would be our funeral song. And we decided it would be Wish You Were Here. And it was really like a joke because we were not in a fighting unit. And a year later, one of us died. And when he died, me and my friend, we chickened out and we couldn't bring ourselves to say to his parents to play the song. And I was talking about how an artistic thing becomes such a huge part of your life. And I said, like, who am I punishing if I don't listen to this story and I don't remember my history? Am I punishing Roger Waters or am I punishing myself? So I wrote this piece, and in Israel, of course, everybody says, yeah, you BDS supporter, you piece of shit. And when I put it on the newsletter and you say, how dare you call Roger Waters an anti-Semite? How dare, the way that he portrays so for me, it's a good thing. It's really, like for example, I'm a friend of Ira Glass from This American Life, and I remember that after the 7th of October, we had conversations that I almost felt that me and him, we were not living on the same universe, and he's a friend, and he's smart, and we have the same views. And very quickly, in the talk, I said to him, Ira, send me the 4 main sources from which you get your information, and I'll send you my 4. And I say, let's share them. And like in 3 weeks, I realized that there are many issues. I don't know. I read a lot of media. I didn't know that the bombings in Gaza were done by an AI app. There was an AI that decided where to throw the bombs. I didn't know that. I knew it because all the 4 sources that he reads from wrote about it. All the 4 sources that I read from didn't. So this idea, I'm saying, let's say, to live in Israel, read American press. To live in US, read European press. It really helps you not to be sucked into a narrative because we do live in a world where we're very, very passive. Everything gets to us. So.
But in a way, you can't be provincial anymore, right? Just because of this, right? And because of how...
So I actually try to be provincial in that sense that I say it's not enough for me to watch N12 and read the New York Times, because when you go to more sources, when you read, I don't know, some kind of a fanzine in Maine, then you realize that what the New York Times says is very, very biased. So the idea is that you must construct your body of knowledge, not to get the most exact one, but the one that is most relevant to your set of belief. It's really like I'm saying, if you try to find out how many bombs were thrown in Ukraine, and I'm more interested in how many twins died in Ukraine. We shouldn't go to the same portals, because sometimes you don't get the information that you want.
So, all right, so I'll open it up. I know some people have questions, and maybe we'll come back to some of the things that were said here. All right, yeah, Aya, you want to begin, please?
Yes, I have a few questions, but should I ask them?
Maybe you can use the mic or something, or I can repeat it.
I'll repeat the question so that the people at home as well could hear it, and then.
Okay. My question was, how do you limit yourself by writing? I'm not saying limit, but how do you write short stories without having the urge to expand on the universe, especially if you write on fictional universes that are so interesting and you write it in such a short way? Like when I try to write a short story, I find it very hard to stay within 10 pages and do it seemingly effortlessly. So
So she's asking, how does he write these short stories without expanding it, and how is he able to keep it in a very pithy, right, very short, and yet be able to express everything he wanted to express, right, in a way which I think is very difficult for a lot of writers to do.
Yeah, I must say that, you know, I never have any ambition to write short. It's really like, I mean, I think I have traits in me that like I'm very impatient, or I lose my concentration, or I do all those kind of things that maybe kind of create something short, but it's never a kind of purpose. I feel that it's a little bit like, you know, when you blow a soap bubble, then I guess sometimes like there is something in the universe that kind of leads me somewhere, and at some point I feel as if it kind of slips away from me. But it's really like many times I could write a story and I say, oh, you know, when the protagonist, on the first day of November, he's going to go to some place, and then I write a story, and the day before that he gets run down by a bus. So it's not as if like when I write a story, I say, okay, I want it to be like 10 centimeters long. It's like I imagine something that is infinite, and at some point, like the story kind of reaches its natural end.
Yeah, please.
Why, I think of the four stories that you already mentioned us, three of them you choose to write in the first person. Why? Is it yourself, it's for us?
So the question is about the first person narrator, and why, you know, why does he often choose that as a way to write his stories?
So it's really funny, but I think in my mind I have what I'm saying is very kind of superficial and not always true, but I have this kind of mode that there are stories that are more I would say word induces, or kind of like, you know, sound induced that I write in first person, and the stories that are more visually kind of like that I see an image, I usually write them in third person, because when you see something, then you tell a story, say, I saw a bus eating a small car. But many times, if there is something that you kind of hear it, as if you hear it in your head, it becomes some kind of an inner monologue. And I think that it's a car concentrate, right? And the Arctic lizard, and what's the third one?
The selfie stick.
The selfie stick. So yeah, so I think that in those three stories, it's basically I wanted to say something about the world, and again, as if when I want to say something about Israel, I write about the U.S. When I want to say something about the U.S., I write about Israel. So I think that I think Arctic lizard and selfie sticks, it's a very, very distinct word. And I wanted to enter this word from a place where the different in the word won't be the center. So it was easier for me to say, here's a guy, he wants stuff. Oh, he lives in a world where the sun is made out of, I don't know, an orange, you know, but I don't want to say in a universe where the world is made out of an orange, a guy lives. So I think that this kind of a inner voice helps me to kind of keep the word in the background, and especially if it's something that is very attractive and wants to go to the foreground, so it helps to push it back.
I feel like recently in Israel there has been a rise, over the last couple of years, there has been a rise in what gets called genre fiction, science fiction, fantasy, that is original, Israeli, Jewish specific, in a way that we haven't really seen up until now. Like up until now, most of the genre fiction that we saw in Hebrew was translated from English. Do you have any thoughts about like why it's happening now, what the connection, like what has taken us up like away from the American translated stuff?
Yeah. You want to repeat
Oh,
it?
sorry. Well, I think, could we hear that? I was spacing out a bit. I apologize. Because I was thinking, started talking about the genre, about sci-fi, and then I'm losing my concentration. I started thinking about sci-fi, and I tried to think about what Hebrew what examples were you referring to? And you want to?
Tell you later.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just the shift in the genre in the last few years in Hebrew also, right? It's primarily
Yeah.
Hebrew, sci-fi oriented, fantasy.
There's a new resurgence at all in Hebrew original science fiction fantasy that is Jewish specific.
Okay, so
inspired
kind
in
of-
a way
okay.
that we haven't seen over the last 80 years of Israeli.
All right, so the emergence of this Jewish-inspired Hebrew sci-fi genre. Yeah.
I think it's not. You're right. It's not only sci-fi. It's also detective books and stuff like that. I think that you have much more kind of a Israel example. I actually think that first of all, this has to do with the fact that in the entire world, this idea of kind of a mainstream or center stage is a little bit disintegrating. You know, it's really the same way that the delivery guy could think that I wrote the anthem. You know, I don't think that I'm a professor in university, and I can tell you that one of the things that it became trickiest is giving examples. Because once you would say, you know, it's like in the Titanic, but now if you say, people say, what's the Titanic? Did he write the anthem? Did Mr. Titanic write the anthem? You know, so the idea is that really to find a movie, a book that everybody knows, a song that everybody knows, this kind of becomes less and less existent. And I think that in such kind of a fractured or fragmented way, there is much more space for genres. Because you don't say, I want to look at what everybody's looking, because everybody's looking at different things, and you say, I'm into sci-fi. Where can I get sci-fi? You know, and also you can get things that are more specific. You know, it's like I'm saying, if you compare now to 10 years ago, if 10 years ago you say, I have a craving to see a clip of a man or a woman in a swimsuit teaching me how to prepare a tiramisu, you know? So I would say like 20 years ago, you would be in such a problem, you know? But now you have dozens of that, and that's really kind of this idea of demand, you know? And I think that today, instead of having those, let's say, huge bestsellers that sell to everyone, then you have the books for people who like sci-fi, and book for vegans, and books for rock climbers, and basically reading in general became a little bit like rock climbing. You know, it's not as if like you meet people and you say, so what book did you read lately? You ask people to read books. You know, that's what I ask.
Right, but in a sense that sense of fragmentation, which is certainly right the product of us having endless choices, right, as consumers, of course, but also I think as intellectuals of what knowledge we want to consume. That seems to me to also have something very dangerous, right? That fragmentation, because then maybe we lose some of the foundations of the universal ideals, beliefs that actually somehow are able to keep us together.
Yeah, it's like, you know, I said in the interview that when you have when a society has a lot in common, then usually the key cultural figure, I'm saying it's not a theory, it's just something that they said, okay, I'm not sure it's true, but I say that then the key cultural figure is usually a poet. Let's say if you think about Walt Whitman or Pushkin or Alterman, then basically, because if we can all enjoy the same poem, we share a lot. We can go on the association. But when things crash a little bit, it moves to fiction. Like suddenly, it's not Walt Whitman, but it's the Great Gatsby, you know, or like it's Scott Fitzgerald or somebody like this. Because the idea is that when we have less in common, maybe we don't share the association, but if there is a narrative or a story, we know all what we're talking about. Now, when people spread a little bit more than that, usually what they have in common is something that is very animalistic and basic. Eating, dancing, singing. You know, it's really like, by the way, it's like free activities that you can find in animal world. You know, I know birds that sing, everybody eats, you know, and animals dance. So in this idea is that basically when I turn on the Israeli TV, and let's say, I would say, some of the time I read about the kidnapped, or I see things about the kidnapped people that are being starved for 400 days. And if I move to foreign press, I can also see children and families in Gaza that are hungry. And right after that, I would see a cook show, and they would teach me how to make some kind of food. And the idea is that I don't think that they're taunting me. I don't think that they're making a joke out of the kidnapped or the people who are starving in Gaza. They basically say, what can we talk to you about, except for your physical survival and what you can eat, And even this idea that I can say that, a culinarical figure has become like kind of a cultural figures, in a sense. If in the section of culture, basically, if once we were able to close our eyes and imagine a world in which children never grow up, then today we can eat something and crap it later, and this is the closest that we get, to kind of experiencing what we've experienced before. And it is a world in which I would say collective and shared values stop existing. And I would say even more than that, let's say if you would look historically, if, I don't know, 40 years ago you would say to British people what nationality you hate the most, they would say French. If you ask the French, they would say German, okay? Now today, if you ask people in almost any countries, who is the group of people that they hate the most, it would be their next door neighbors. Like Republicans hate Democrats, Bibi supporters hate liberals, But in the end, when you go to all the countries, most of the countries that I know, they're split on half. So you have two groups of people hating each other. Every time you do an election, you win by 10 votes and a bottle of Coke. And then you can oppress the other side. And then 4 years later, they oppress you. But this idea of how can you talk about shared values when basically the people who live in your communities are the people that represents the most extreme opposite of what you believe in.
So, I mean, that's very depressing, but I think it's very true, right? In that sense of literature and culture used to be a glue, right? Some kind of social adhesive. You mentioned Gatsby, right? I remember I read Gatsby when I was growing up in the United States. I read Gatsby, and everyone read Gatsby, and Ben Franklin, and some of the autobiography and a few other works. And that creates some kind of shared culture. And today, from thinking about the example that you gave, having watched last night what you just said, right? The MasterChef or Krav Sakinim, if we're thinking about Israeli society, if that's all we have left, and it might be, I don't want to be too depressing, but if that's what we have left, we don't even have the stories.
No, it's really like, I think that, I always like to talk to people about culture, because if you talk to them about sex, you get into trouble. So I find myself, for example, talking to so many people about the clip of the Trump is making, is working in McDonald's making French fries. Yeah. Okay. Now, I think, first of all, I think it's a great movie. It's a wonderful movie.
That's why he did it. Yeah.
Yeah. No, but again, the ways people talked about it was the same way that people used to talk about movies and books, because this was the greatest kind of cultural stimulation that people had, because they saw something that didn't claim to affect their life, because usually we see something, they say, oh, they're ruining the ozone, oh, they're doing the vaccination, oh, they do the... So it's the idea that we engage so much with actuality instead of culture is that we justify to ourselves that this is for our survival. But then we take a break and we see Trump making French fries, and it's really like a little bit like Walt Whitman, It's like
exactly
this
idea,
it's this idea. It's like, it's what we love about America, and it's somebody rich working in a job that he would never really work, but he's doing it for us, so we might as well appreciate it. And this idea of kind of a devolution in which we become more and more passive, in which we just kind of glare at things and don't want to engage in anything that would
Right, but that's
change
it,
our
right?
imagination.
That's the devolution, right? Because with Walt Whitman, you have to engage with it and read and think about it and feel something, even if you just have patience to do it for 3 minutes. You watch the clip of Trump on the fryer.
It's amazing. I watch it 3 times.
But exactly that. That's the different experience that we have, right? That engagement, that introspection, that thought, is that passivity that you said. That for me is what's so dangerous.
For me, if we want to finish this on a very sad note.
No, I don't want to finish on a sad note. I want to finish on a happy note.
Okay, no, funny sad note. Then I can say, look, I have many examples for this kind of devolution that we're going through, and you know, and again, a lot of it has to do with technology, but I think that the simplest example of this idea of us kind of outsourcing thing or simplifying something and in the end losing is my personal sad story of me and the WhatsApp messages. I send a lot of WhatsApp messages because apparently I'm a very talkative person and a lot of people send me WhatsApp, so I have to answer them. And my 18-year-old son took pity on me. And he said, I see you all the time with your chubby thumb trying to do this. He says, you know, like, you don't deserve it, you're a good father, I'll teach you something. And then he said, you know, you can just do this long press and then send an emoji. Instead of answering, instead of saying, okay, Yoav, I'll come there at 12, you just do this, you know? So I said, great, and I'm not very much into kind of moving between those emojis, so I basically have 3 emojis that I use. That it's this, and the heart. But the heart, I learned that there are 2 kinds of hearts. There is a heart, red one, which means I love you, and there is a heart with fingers. That doesn't make any sense because I'm sending you a text message, where did this finger come from? Which probably means I say that I love you. But I really love all of you, so I don't use that. So I just have my red heart, and I have this, and I have this. And basically, I would say I get something like more than 100 WhatsApp conversation a day. 90% of them, 3 emojis, I'm done. So let's say if Yoav says to me, but you know, there will be Q&A in the end, I hope you don't mind. I go like this, you know, and if Yoav says, and you know, and we bought you your favorite mineral water, you know, so I go like this, and Yoav says, but you know, but please, you know, I really appreciate you and I really like your work, but I don't want this to be like last time, you know, when in the end you took off your clothes and spat on this woman in the first line. Then I send him a heart. Because, like, what can I, you know, it's really, like, it's too complex. So I send him a heart. So what I discovered, really, and I checked it, that 90% of my conversations with the word is that people say to me something complex, and because I have only 3 words, you know, in my tiny little language, I basically tell them that I love them, which is very hippie. It's not very pragmatic when the guy from the bank says, you know, you're a great writer, but you owe us 10,000 shekel. When I sent him a heart, I'm not sure it solves the problem. But as my son says, I have so much more extra time. So it's really like, imagine this word, the word kind of says to you, hey, don't carry it, I'll hold it for you. Hey, don't do that. And basically we outsource everything. And we are kind of these kind of 30-year-old people who go everywhere on the golf crates and gradually discovering that they can't walk anymore. You know, we kind of gave something out. It's really, I can be in the elderly person position. You know, it's like I waited all my life
to pontificate
to
tell
meet her.
everyone. Yeah.
So I have a friend who lives in Iceland and who has 2 daughters who are married, who lives in Haifa, and whenever they want to get from one place to another, when this guy lives in Iceland, they haven't been in Haifa since he studied 30 years ago, they call him to tell him how to get to their own home when the GPS doesn't work. Okay? Because they don't know how to get there, because they outsourced it, and it makes sense. It made sense. But when you think about it, when you need to navigate from one place to another, think about how many fucking trees you get to see and how many strange cats that goes like this when you look for the turn left, you know? And when you do that, you don't. So I think we have a big problem.
So one final question. I know we're almost out of time. So first of all, it's a question. A few of the students asked me to ask this. When we finish, I think we'll have some time, so you can maybe chat with Etgar just on some of the questions I didn't have time to ask. But one thing I wanted to, so we have quite a few aspiring writers here, excellent writers, and I think that maybe some of them were too shy to ask, but it was maybe what is the worst advice you received starting? And if you could give them, what would be your best honest advice about how to make it in what is obviously a very difficult industry?
Well, I studied in Tel Aviv University, and quite a few people told me that writing fiction is very distracting, and that if I want to get my PhD, then I should stop writing. But I can tell you something. I once taught in NYU, and in the beginning, you know, when you do a workshop, in the beginning, you want people to say their names, but you also want them to say something. So I said to them, okay, each of you tell me your name and why are you in this workshop? You know, why do you come to this workshop? And basically, I would say that about 80% of my students said that they came to this workshop because what they want to do is to write the great American novel. And my advice to them and to anyone who writes, I said to them, look, if I wanted to write the great Israeli novel, I would never write it, because I would write a paragraph and look at the paragraph and I say, is this the first paragraph of the great Israeli novel? No way, you know? And I would just keep rewriting it and rewriting it. But I said to them, if you just say, like, I'm bad at physics and I don't like my parents' business and you know, and like, I don't know, and I don't even like to shower. Maybe I write something. Then if you do it enough time, maybe you write something that will be amazing and will change people's life. But I truly believe in some kind of a nonchalance or humbleness that comes with writing. I can tell you I'm very, very vain when I don't write, but whenever I write, I'm really immersed in the feeling that I'm doing something stupid and totally unimportant, and I get high on it, and I think that this is the only way I know that you can write something that has a chance to be meaningful. If you want to write something that is meaningful, it's a little bit like, imagine, I don't know, kind of going on a date with the most amazing person. Oh my God, I want to have his children. Oh yeah. It's so difficult to go to this date and make that other person see how amazing you are. But if you're just sitting with somebody, then in 5 seconds they see how amazing you are, you know, so if you're amazing.
All right, so on that note, I want to thank Etgar Keret very much.
Thank you. Today.
And I think this was a great pleasure. I think it's also very edifying for all of us. This will be up on the YouTube, on the Center for the Study of the U.S. on Tau VOD, so check that out. And also check out Etgar's newsletter, Alphabet Soup. It really is terrific. And for all my students, I'll see you on Monday to talk about Ben Franklin.
נחמד. כן, כן.